Once upon a time, in the heart of Lagos, lived Madame Ijeoma, a woman whose influence and wealth were unmatched. Her husband had passed years ago, leaving her with a thriving business empire and one son, Chidubem, the jewel of her life. From the moment he was born, she had nurtured him with love, discipline, and the unshakable belief that one day he would take over their family legacy. Chidubem was no ordinary young man. Tall, polished, and impeccably groomed, he had spent years studying abroad, learning not just business but also the subtle art of leadership. Now back in Nigeria, he was ready to step into his father's shoes, managing companies, investments, and philanthropic ventures. But there was one matter that kept Madame Ijeoma awake at night. Who would marry her son? She had seen it all: women drawn to wealth rather than character, smiles that hid selfish hearts, and eyes that glittered with greed. Madame Ijeoma knew the world her son was entering, and she refused to let him fall into a trap. She wanted someone genuine, someone whose love was not bought with money or status. And so, she began to craft a plan that was as bold as it was unusual. To truly see who was worthy of Chidubem's heart, Madame Ijeoma would disguise herself. No silk, no gold jewelry, no air of authority. Only a simple uniform, a mop, and a bucket. She would step into the world of her son's office as a humble cleaner, invisible to most but watching everything with the sharp eyes of a mother determined to protect her child. Little did she know, this plan would stir curiosity, jealousy, and even danger. For in a world full of ambition and envy, appearances could be deceiving, and hearts could betray. Madame Ijeoma was about to uncover truths she never expected, and someone unsuspecting was about to capture her son's attention in ways she had never imagined. The following morning, Madame Ijeoma prepared herself carefully. She traded her designer outfits for a faded blouse and a simple wrapper, tied loosely around her waist. Her headscarf hid her perfectly styled hair, and she slipped on old rubber slippers. In her hands were a mop and bucket, and in her heart a quiet determination. Today, she would step into the office where her son had just begun working, not as a mother or a wealthy woman, but as a humble cleaner. As she entered the towering glass building, the sound of her slippers echoed against the polished floor. Conversations stopped abruptly. Office workers exchanged puzzled looks, whispering behind their hands. "Who let her in?" one young woman scoffed, wrinkling her nose. "Did she get lost on the way from the village?" another laughed. Madame Ijeoma ignored them, pushing her mop steadily across the lobby, her eyes scanning the room, silently observing. Most of the women laughed openly, some even making cruel jokes about her appearance. But then she noticed a young woman sitting quietly at her desk, focused on her work, not even glancing up. Something about her calm, respectful demeanor caught Madame Ijeoma's attention. She would watch this one closely. Meanwhile, in the corner, Tosin and Ada, two ambitious employees, noticed the new cleaner and whispered mockingly to each other. "She's so slow." "I could finish this in 10 minutes, Tosin said, smirking. Ada giggled. Their eyes were sharp with envy, ready to judge anyone who didn't match their own superficial standards. Madame Ijeoma, though tired from bending and scrubbing, moved with deliberate grace. Every gesture was measured, every action a test. She wasn't here to be humiliated. She was here to see the true hearts of those around her, to separate genuine kindness from envy and greed. And as she watched the quiet young woman help a colleague pick up dropped papers without a hint of complaint, Madame Ijeoma felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, this woman might be the one worthy of her son's heart. By mid-morning, the office was buzzing with its usual energy. Phones ringing, keyboards clacking, and high heels clicking against the polished floors. But the real tension was centered around the quiet young woman, whose name was Amara. She had already caught Madame Ijeoma's attention with her calm demeanor and willingness to help others, but to Tosin and Ada, she was now a threat, a target for ridicule. "Look at her," Tosin whispered, nudging Ada. "She thinks she's so special just because she helped that poor cleaner yesterday." Ada smirked, flicking her perfectly manicured nails. We can't let her take attention from us. Not here. Not now. Madame Igioma, though disguised as a humble cleaner, observed everything from the corner near the hallway. She saw the sharp glances, the whispered plans, and the malicious grins. She knew she would have to test Amara further, but first she let the jealousy unfold naturally. People often reveal their true selves when they are plotting. As Amara bent to help a coworker who had dropped a stack of files, Tosin saw her chance. "Hey, slowpoke! Maybe the cleaner can finish this for you," she called mockingly, loud enough for nearby workers to hear. Laughter erupted, but Amara did not raise her voice. Instead, she calmly finished helping the colleague, then returned to her desk without looking at Tosin or Ada. Madame Igioma felt a swell of pride. This was exactly the patience and grace she wanted to see. True character shone in moments like these, not when people were praised or flattered. But the ambitious rivals weren't done. During the lunch break, Tosin and Ada hatched a plan to humiliate Amara in front of the entire office. "We'll make sure she knows she doesn't belong here," Ada said, her eyes glinting with malice. "By the end of today, everyone will see her for what she really is." Meanwhile, Madame Igioma quietly set about her next test. She carried her mop past the break room, accidentally dropping a bucket of water near the doorway. The office erupted into laughter as the water spilled across the floor, but Amara didn't falter. Without hesitation, she knelt down and helped guide Madame Igioma to a safe spot, ignoring the snickers around her. Madame Igioma's heart warmed. She had found someone truly kind, someone whose heart and spirit couldn't be bought or intimidated. But she also knew that envy and greed were brewing, and the real challenges were just beginning. The quiet war for loyalty, respect, and heart had only just begun, and Madame Igioma was ready to watch it unfold. By the following morning, the office was tense. Whispers floated through the air like invisible threats, and the usual hum of keyboards and printers carried an edge of suspicion. Tosin and Ada had been plotting all night, determined to tarnish Amara's reputation before anyone noticed her worth. They were convinced that a young woman with a kind heart and quiet confidence had no place in the world of ambition and power. Amara, unaware of the scheming around her, arrived early as usual, greeting the security guard and receptionist with a warm smile. She made her way to her desk, balancing her lunchbox and laptop, and sat quietly, ready to tackle the day's work. She didn't notice the sharp glances of Tosin, nor Ada's barely hidden smirk as they whispered to each other, plotting the first strike. Meanwhile, Madame Igioma was already in the office, disguised as a cleaner. Her faded clothes and mop gave her an unassuming appearance, but her eyes missed nothing. She watched as Tosin dropped a stack of files near Amara's desk, pretending it was an accident. The other employees glanced at the incident, some curious, some amused, while Amara bent down to pick up the scattered papers. "Careful, slowpoke," Tosin muttered under her breath, loud enough for Amara to hear. Ada giggled quietly, enjoying the moment. Amara paused, looked up, and smiled politely. "Thank you," she said to the colleague whose files had fallen, ignoring the taunt. Her calm response only made Madame Igioma smile inside. This was patience, dignity, and integrity in action. But Tosin and Ada were relentless. They moved to the break room, whispering to gather everyone's attention for a small, cruel spectacle. "Did you hear?" Ada began, feigning shock. "Our quiet little friend here thinks she can outshine all of us. Isn't that adorable?" Laughter followed, growing louder as other employees joined in, sensing drama. Madame Igioma stepped closer, her mop tapping softly on the polished floor. She let the laughter ring out, observing who would rise above it and who would sink. Amara, for her part, continued quietly organizing her work, showing no anger, no shame, only composure. For Madame Igioma, the day was not just about testing Amara, it was about revealing the true colors of everyone around her. In a world full of envy and ambition, she knew that only those with courage, humility, and kindness could endure the pressures of wealth, power and attention. And as Tosin and Ada's plan began to unravel slowly, Madame Ijeoma smiled inwardly. The real lesson was about to begin, and the game of hearts, loyalty, and cunning had only just started. By mid-afternoon, the office had turned into a battlefield of whispers and suspicious glances. Tosin and Ada were relentless, plotting small humiliations to make Amara falter. They whispered false stories to colleagues, trying to isolate her from the rest of the office. But Madame Ijeoma, still disguised as a simple cleaner, moved silently through the corridors, observing everything with quiet precision. As Amara bent to organize a pile of files on the floor, Tosin deliberately tripped over her own bag, pretending to stumble into Amara's workspace. A few employees gasped, expecting Amara to snap or react angrily. But she didn't. She steadied Tosin with a gentle hand and whispered, "Are you okay?" without drawing attention to the accident. Madame Ijeoma's heart swelled. This was the kind of grace she had been looking for. Noticing the increasing envy in the room, Madame Ijeoma decided it was time to subtly intervene. She accidentally dropped her mop near Tosin, making a small mess. Tosin's perfectly styled outfit brushed against the water, and a few colleagues stifled laughter. But Madame Ijeoma didn't act further. She simply kept working, letting the small incident serve as a silent reminder that actions have consequences. Meanwhile, Amara was called to the manager's office to discuss a project she had been leading. On the way, Ada whispered sharply, "Don't think you can impress anyone here. It's just a matter of time before they see you're nothing special." Amara's expression remained calm. She simply nodded politely. Her quiet confidence seemed to infuriate Tosin and Ada even more. Later, during lunch, Madame Ijeoma sat in the corner, quietly preparing her own meal. She noticed Amara sharing part of her lunch with a colleague who had forgotten theirs, showing kindness without expecting anything in return. At that moment, Madame Ijeoma knew that Amara's heart was pure and genuine, untainted by envy or ambition. The rivals, on the other hand, were growing restless. They exchanged sharp looks, plotting even bolder schemes to humiliate Amara in front of the son of Madame Ijeoma, whom they did not yet know was observing everything from the office upstairs. The stage was set. A confrontation was coming, and Madame Ijeoma was ready to see who would rise and who would fall. As the day drew to a close, Madame Ijeoma's eyes met Amara's from across the room. A silent understanding passed between them, a recognition of strength, patience, and integrity. But Tosin and Ada had no idea that the quiet, unassuming cleaner was quietly orchestrating events that would soon teach them a lesson they would never forget. The next morning, the office was buzzing with energy, but underneath the usual clatter of keyboards and ringing phones was a tense undercurrent of rivalry. Tosin and Ada had spent the night planning their most audacious move yet, to embarrass Amara in front of the entire company and, more importantly, in front of Madame Ijeoma's son Chidubem, who was returning to oversee the business. Amara, as usual, arrived early. She greeted the security guard and receptionist with a warm smile and walked to her desk calmly. Her quiet demeanor and dedication had already earned the admiration of a few colleagues, but the rivals were determined to undo her growing reputation. At mid-morning, Tosin called out to Amara in front of everyone. "Hey, slowpoke! Maybe you forgot how to use a stapler," she sneered, pointing at a pile of papers. A few colleagues giggled, ready to watch the humiliation unfold. Ada snapped a photo of the moment, planning to spread it later on the office group chat. Amara paused, looked at the stack of papers, and quietly fixed them without a word. She smiled politely at Tosin and whispered, "Here, let me help you." The act of kindness, so genuine and calm, caused a few colleagues to look twice, and angered Tosin and Ada even more. Madame Ijeoma, watching from the hallway with her mop in hand, decided it was time to send a subtle warning. She accidentally tripped near Tosin, spilling a small bucket of water close to her expensive heels. Laughter erupted, but it wasn't at Amara's expense this time. Tosin's face flushed red with embarrassment. The tables had quietly turned. Later that afternoon, Amara was called into a meeting with the management team. Tosin and Ada saw this as another opportunity to frame her, whispering false information to make it seem like Amara was incompetent. But Madame Ijeoma had already prepared. She had left subtle hints in the reports, highlighting Amara's contributions and making it clear who was truly responsible for the recent successful projects. When Chidubem arrived at the office, he immediately noticed Amara's calm, competent demeanor. He saw the contrast between her genuine kindness and the petty schemes of Tosin and Ada. Madame Ijeoma, still in disguise, smiled quietly to herself. Her son was observing everything, and the lesson for the rivals was about to unfold. By the end of the day, Tosin and Ada's attempts to humiliate Amara had backfired spectacularly, and a subtle but powerful message had been sent. True character cannot be faked, and envy always leads to downfall. By the next morning, the office was unusually quiet. The energy of gossip and whispers seemed to have shifted, replaced by curiosity and unease. Tosin and Ada were restless, having realized that their schemes against Amara were failing. Meanwhile, Madame Ijeoma, still disguised as a quiet cleaner, was preparing to reveal the full truth. Amara arrived early as usual, carrying her laptop and lunchbox. She greeted a few colleagues with a gentle smile and made her way to her desk. Tosin and Ada were plotting their next move, thinking that if they humiliated Amara in front of the new company owner, they could regain control. But they had no idea that Chidubem was already observing from a nearby office. Just as Tosin prepared to spread a false rumor about Amara's latest project, Madame Ijeoma stepped forward. Her voice, calm but firm, echoed through the office. "Tosin, Ada, may I have your attention, please?" The two rivals froze, not recognizing authority in the unassuming cleaner. Madame Ijeoma continued, "Everything you've tried to do to Amara has been noticed. Every whisper, every trick, every attempt to undermine her has been recorded and observed." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "And now it's time for the truth." At that moment, Chidubem stepped into the office, his presence commanding immediate attention. The employees straightened, and Tosin and Ada's faces drained of color. "This young woman," Chidubem said, gesturing to Amara, "has shown more integrity, patience, and competence than anyone else in this company. And the person you've been trying to humiliate? She is under my mother's careful observation, someone she trusts completely." Madame Ijeoma slowly removed her scarf and faded wrapper, revealing her true identity. Gasps filled the room. "I am Madame Ijeoma, Chidubem's mother and owner of this company," she announced. The rivals stumbled backward in shock, their schemes laid bare. Amara stood quietly, composed and dignified, while Tosin and Ada realized the magnitude of their misjudgment. Chidubem approached Amara and said, "I see your worth, and it's clear that your character far exceeds your rival's petty schemes." Madame Ijeoma looked at Tosin and Ada, her gaze sharp but calm. "Envy and deceit will always fail. You sought to destroy someone you thought was beneath you, but in truth, you revealed your own weaknesses." Her words struck deep, and the rivals could only nod, ashamed and defeated. That day, Amara's quiet strength and integrity were celebrated, while Tosin and Ada learned a bitter lesson. True character and kindness are always recognized, no matter how quiet or humble a person may seem. After the shocking revelation, the office was in stunned silence. Madame Ijeoma returned to her role as the company owner, no longer needing to hide behind her cleaner disguise. Chidubem, having observed everything, walked up to Amara with admiration. "Your dedication and character are rare," he said sincerely. "You've proven yourself in ways that cannot be ignored." Amara, still calm and composed, nodded respectfully. "Thank you, sir. I only tried to do my best and treat everyone fairly." Her humility impressed Chidubem even more. Meanwhile, Tosin and Ada were escorted to the HR office to face the consequences of their actions. The evidence of their scheming, from manipulated emails to staged incidents, was undeniable. Madame Ijeoma had compiled everything in secret, ensuring that no injustice could occur. "Your envy and deceit have no place in this company," she said firmly. "You will be suspended indefinitely, and your reputations will serve as a lesson to others who think manipulation is a shortcut to success." Word of the event spread quickly throughout the office. Colleagues who had once watched Amara's struggles in silence now came forward to congratulate her. Even those who had doubted her were forced to acknowledge her quiet strength and integrity. That evening, Chidubem personally invited Amara to a small dinner in his family home. It was a gesture of respect, but also a subtle recognition that her integrity had earned a place in their inner circle. Madame Ijeoma watched from a distance, a proud smile on her face. Her careful observations had paid off. The right person had been recognized, and the wrong ones had faced justice. Tosin and Ada, now reflecting on their actions, realized too late that envy and deceit only lead to downfall. They had underestimated not only Amara's patience but also Madame Ijeoma's wisdom. Their arrogance had blinded them, and the consequences were unavoidable. As for Amara, she remained humble, her quiet demeanor untouched by the attention or praise. She had learned that patience, integrity, and kindness always triumph, even in a world full of envy and deceit. A week had passed since the dramatic revelation at the office, but the tension lingered. Tosin and Ada, though suspended, were still simmering with anger and humiliation. They whispered among themselves, plotting ways to regain power, but deep down, they knew their reputation had been shattered beyond repair. Meanwhile, Amara continued her work quietly, her focus and professionalism undisturbed. She had gained the respect of her colleagues and the admiration of Chidubem. Yet she knew Madame Ijeoma had one final test in mind, not for her, but for the rivals. One afternoon, Madame Ijeoma called Tosin and Ada back into her office. The rivals entered cautiously, unsure whether this was another trap or an opportunity for redemption. Madame Ijeoma, calm and composed, spoke slowly. "You have learned the hard way that envy and deception lead only to downfall," she said. "But this is also a chance to reflect and change. The company is not just about wealth or power, it is about character, respect, and honesty." Tosin opened her mouth to argue, but Madame Ijeoma raised her hand. "No excuses. Your actions caused harm, embarrassment, and disrupted lives. Yet, there is one way to make amends, not by words, but by actions." She handed each of them a report, detailing projects Amara had successfully completed. Assist her in finalizing these projects, work under her guidance, and show that you can be trustworthy and competent. If you fail, the consequences will be permanent. The rivals hesitated but realized they had no choice. Amara, ever calm and quiet, accepted them with grace, assigning tasks without a trace of malice. Throughout the week, Tosin and Ada struggled to meet expectations, their arrogance replaced by humility. They realized the true strength of Amara was not just in her work, but in her patience, dignity, and moral integrity. By the end of the week, the rivals had learned their final lesson. Envy, deceit, and arrogance will always fail against true character. Madame Ijeoma, watching from her office, knew her plan had succeeded. Not only had Amara's worth been recognized, but those who tried to destroy her had faced the consequences of their actions and learned a valuable life lesson. The office had returned to its normal rhythm, but there was a noticeable shift. Amara moved through the space with quiet confidence, her work ethic and humility earning admiration from everyone. She was no longer just the quiet girl in the corner. She had become a symbol of patience, strength, and integrity. Tosin and Ada, once arrogant and scheming, now approached their work differently. Under Amara's guidance, they completed their tasks diligently and with humility. They realized that true respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned through character and actions. While they had lost the opportunity to manipulate and control, they gained a hard-earned lesson about honesty and integrity, a lesson that would shape their future. Chidubem, impressed by Amara's unwavering character, personally recognized her contribution to the company. "You've shown that it's not wealth, looks, or cunning that defines a person's worth," he said, "but the strength of their heart and the integrity of their actions." Amara, ever modest, simply nodded, letting her work speak louder than her words. Madame Ijeoma, proud of both her son and Amara, quietly observed from a distance. Her plan had worked perfectly. She had tested Amara, revealed the truth to the rivals, and ensured justice was served without a single unfair act. Her mission to find people of true character had been fulfilled. As for the office, the story of the quiet woman who taught even the most deceitful colleagues a bitter lesson spread. Whispers of admiration replaced gossip, and a sense of morality and fairness began to guide everyone's actions. In the end, the lessons were clear. Envy and deceit may offer temporary satisfaction, but they always lead to downfall. Patience, integrity, humility, and kindness are the true markers of strength and success. Amara's quiet determination had not only earned her respect but had also reshaped the environment around her, proving that a good heart always triumphs over scheming minds.